Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question. I'll flip it in for you guys, but I'm going to read through it and summarize it just slightly. And this is regarding muscle growth and progressive overload, and it's soreness not being a good thing. And he's like, but adaptation is something you want to avoid in building muscle. Confuse the body, right, babe? How will you know if you are progressing in muscle growth if you avoid tearing your muscles during training? Even after adding weight each week may mean you may be getting stronger but not building size. All right, guys, and he's trying to say that, look, he needs to be able to actually track percentages and all sorts of stuff. It's too complex to know if you're progressing on strength and progressive overload, and that soreness and everything seems to be a good way to know if you're gaining muscle. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, do a little bit of crafting, and let's talk about this. All right, there's some things that really don't make sense here, and these are common misconceptions you see out there, but these are people who don't understand the muscle building process as far as soreness and progressive overload and everything goes. All right, myth number one, that you have to actually tear down muscle tissue in order to facilitate growth. All right, that's a big misconception. That's using really the wrong terminology. People actually think that they're tearing apart muscles. No, guys, if you get any tears in your muscle, little even small tears, usually you see bruising and stuff under the skin from the blood seeping out. Minor tears in your muscle are still tears. That's not what we're talking about. With the micro tearing that people are talking about isn't actually in the muscle fibers. It's oftentimes in the connective tissue, and that's what causes the soreness that you feel, is micro tearing in the connective tissue at the end of the fibers. You got to remember, your fibers don't get longer, they get thicker. Now, some of that connective tissue get thickened up a little bit, but when we're talking about breaking muscle tissue down, it's protein disruption. Okay, we're not talking about actual little physical cracks through the actual cells or something in the muscle the way people are thinking of, that you're ripping them apart. You're not. Again, this is bodybuilder analogy, trying to understand a complex system in the body. No, what you're actually having happen is disruption of the proteins. Okay, the proteins themselves get a little pulled apart and disrupted, all right, because you have little lines of protein all in there and they get disrupted a little bit. It's not actual damage to the cell that you can feel. What guys are thinking of with that connective tissue tearing, that's what you feel. The tissue disruption in a muscle, you don't have nerves in there that will actually sense any of that. Your body doesn't necessarily register that. But tissue disruption does seem to be necessary for muscle growth. But here's the thing, that tissue disruption happens even in sets that aren't really, meaning not necessarily that hard. The tissue disruption happens from weightlifting in general that we're talking about with the actual tissue proteins. All right, there's no pain associated with it. In fact, it's just your normal workouts cause that to happen, even ones to where you haven't even gotten any stronger sometimes from the last week. The training itself causes that. Any fairly intense, moderately intense training is going to do that. But that's the tearing down is just the tissue disruption inside the tissue proteins themselves. Again, it's been overhyped as something more than it is. You're actually not trying to make yourself sore. Soreness is not related to that at all. All right, the soreness is in the connective tissue at the ends of the muscle cells, So that's what's causing DOMS and soreness and all these things that people talk about there. And as far as saying, well, you're getting stronger but not bigger, that's impossible. Other than the first few weeks of training with some of your initial nervous system changes, usually when you get stronger, particularly stronger in your rep work, you always grow as that. Not sometimes, that's guaranteed muscle growth if you get stronger. And remember, guys, stronger means actually stronger, not cheating the weight up. If you've been benching 185 pounds for 5 reps, and you get strong enough to do 195 for 5 reps using the same form, the same rep tempo, everything else, that is a strength gain. Okay, that's what we mean by strength gain. It doesn't mean that you cheated the weight up or you started bouncing it off your chest. Let's say you'd been pausing for a 1 count and pressing with 185, and you bounce it off your chest for 200. That's not strength. That's not progressive overload. That's using external forces to make the work easier, so you're doing less work. Strength gains means that you're actually doing more work. That's what we count as an improvement in strength, right? The ability to do more work the same way. Not putting a bigger arch to cut the range of motion, not bouncing the weight, but actually using the same form, same technique, same range of motion to put more weight on the bar. That always causes muscle growth other than the first couple weeks that you're in the gym. So someone who's been training a little while adds 10 pounds to the bar for the same number of reps. That's rarely a nervous system change for the most part. Now, 1 rep max can have a stronger neural component, but a 5 rep max, 8 rep max, no, not at all. No, it doesn't have to be maxes. It can be the actual rep work, non-failure rep work. Progressive overload always causes muscle growth. And that's something that people need to understand there. So yeah, when you are coming in and you're saying, no, I mean, soreness is a better indicator because at least I know I tore down the muscle tissues. That's absurd. That's absurd because there's no correlation with soreness and gains in muscle. And I broke that down very clearly in that other video as to why. That in fact, most of the time, soreness is a sign that you're not optimally building muscle tissue. You're doing something, most of the time, if you're getting sore, you're doing something that is not ideal for max muscle growth. All right, it's not even close to ideal. And because soreness is usually caused by either doing too much workload for you to recover from, which spaces out how often you can train, which means less muscle growth, right? Because you can only stimulate a little growth in one session. So that doesn't do much for you. Doesn't do much at all because muscle growth is a product of cumulative fatigue on the muscles. How much workload you're doing over the week, over the month, over the 3-month period. That's more important than what goes on in an individual session. So doing a bunch of work that then forces you to not be able to train again as often, or you can't train again very soon, or at least with the sort of tonnages you use there, is actually slower muscle growth. Well, that causes soreness. Training too infrequently causes soreness, meaning if you have a leg day and your legs get sore every week, again, soreness, it means you're not training them often enough for maximum growth. So again, soreness is a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something wrong with your training. So if anything, this idea that, well, at least if I get sore, I know I'm tearing tissue down and I'm growing. No, you don't. There's no guarantee of that at all. In fact, it might be slowing your growth. Remember, it's not about tearing down like people were thinking of to the point to where you feel pain. That's not tissue protein disruption, which is what we're talking about for stimulating muscle growth. That's connective tissue damage. That's connective tissue trauma. That's what causes DOMS. That's what causes soreness most of the time. So a big difference between the two. But progressive overload almost always guarantees muscle growth, again, especially if you've been training a little while. So you need to remember, say on your bench press, if you go from benching 185 to 195 for 5 reps, I promise you that your pecs and your triceps and your front delts have all gotten bigger. All right, it absolutely is almost guaranteed that they will have gotten bigger from that. Does it mean bigger in the mirror? No, but it means if they were to do like an MRI or a DEXA scan of those muscles, there will be a small increase in their size. Guess what? When you go from 195 to 205, again, as long as you're doing more work, you're not cheating the weight up. You're actually letting the muscles do the same sort of workload with the heavier weight. Again, same range of motion, same tempo. So again, stronger, strength gain. You will have gotten even bigger again. It will happen almost every single time. Could there be exceptions to the rule to where you occasionally get some extra neural gain, some neuromuscular efficiency? Sure. But the vast majority of the time, any increase in performance, any increase in the work that you've had a muscle do in a given set will almost always, with very few exceptions, equal an increase in muscle size. Progressive overload is how you get bigger. It's how you grow. And by that same token, that doesn't even mean increasing the weight. If you've been doing 5 reps with 185 and you get strong enough to do 7 reps or 8 reps with 185, again, using the same technique, the muscles will also grow from that because, again, you've gotten stronger. You subjected them to a higher workload and a higher workload density. That's the other thing, too. Everyone wants to throw more volume at something to increase workload, but it's at a lower workload density. So again, it's not necessarily going to give you as much muscle growth as if you had gotten stronger on one set. Meaning adding 2 or 3 extra sets will stimulate a little muscle growth, but it won't stimulate as much growth as if you added 5 pounds or 10 pounds to the bar for the same number of reps, or if you got strong enough to do extra reps with the same weight. That is worth more growth than adding more volume. And even though all of them add more workload, but people need to remember that progressive overload is how you ensure growth. There's no separation between the two. People get confused with that because they occasionally see some individuals who are really strong for their size and some individuals who are weak for their size, and they assume that they can differentiate between the two. But I promise you that that skinnier guy who has an amazing deadlift and squat for his body weight, he has more muscle when he got to that 500-pound squat than when he had a 400-pound squat. And you have to keep that in mind. He might not have gotten a lot bigger, but he will have gotten bigger. You don't see a 100-pound increase on a big exercise without a measurable increase in muscle growth. And it doesn't matter that there's someone bigger than him who is weaker, because you're not comparing it across individual. It's within yourself. It's when you subject any one of your specific muscles to more work, that muscle grows as a result of it. All right. It doesn't mean that it grows at the same rate as someone else's for the same amount of pounds that they had. And that's where the confusion, meaning the guy bigger than him might have gained more muscle from an 80-pound increase to his squat than the smaller guy gained from a 100-pound in his, but they both will have gotten bigger from the increase. And I think that's where the confusion is, that it's not a direct measurement that applies to all people. It's just that we know that there's a linear gain within a given person. So no, this other stuff doesn't matter at all. The soreness, the pump, that stuff can sometimes be indicators of muscle growth. They can sometimes be indicators of muscle growth, but sometimes they're not indicators of muscle growth. And that's what people need to remember. What is an indicator of muscle growth is that you can measure and track your workloads and know that you subjected a muscle to more work, because we know that that's what causes muscle growth. And that can make it a hell of a lot less confusing. And like he was saying about confusing the muscle confusion is not actually real. It's not real at all. That's just another fancy way of really saying progressive overload. Because you want to confuse and disrupt a muscle, make it work a little harder. That's all you have to do. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.